Hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones.
These are the most powerful storms on Earth.
The water was so high, when I opened the door, it gushed me back.
It just obliterated the islands of the Bahamas.
It's a fight for survival.
No food, no water.
For man.
There are people in life and death situations.
And beast.
There was no way that I was gonna leave the dogs outside.
But the total impact of a hurricane can sometimes reveal surprising discoveries.
It almost created this a unique natural experiment.
Hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes.
This was the deadliest tornado on record.
The impact can be devastating.
God completely wiped it off the map.
We step inside the disaster.
We were running for our lives.
It hits like a freight train.
And unravel the unexpected and sometimes jaw-dropping total impact.
Believe it or not, some good can come from these monster storms.
A tropical wave leaves the western coast of Africa. 5 days later, a small cyclone develops in the mid-Atlantic. It's named Tropical Storm Dorian. Though no one knows it yet, it's set to become a monster hurricane, one that will have far-reaching impact beyond the storm itself. Across the Atlantic, for most Bahamians, preparing for hurricane season is nothing new. It's something to take in stride.
We were prepared traditionally. You know, I have hurricane impact windows at home, standby generators, so I always have water, that type of thing. I've experienced I think 6 storms. Usually I'm home, usually my house is pretty much untouched. My kids' playhouse sits 6 feet off the ground. It's built out of wood, and it has survived 2 prior storms with no issue. So, you know, I felt pretty secure at home.
The Bahamas are an archipelago of more than 700 islands, speckled across 470,000 square kilometers of ocean. An ecological oasis and a tourism mecca.
Beautiful beaches, beautiful weather, great people, great food. You can't ask for a better place to live.
But the very climate that makes the tropics so enjoyable is exactly what feeds tropical cyclones.
The wind speed gets above 63 kilometers per hour, they are called a tropical storm. If they get up to 119 kilometers per hour or greater, then that tropical storm becomes the big daddy of them all, becomes a hurricane. What determines whether it's a hurricane, a cyclone, or a typhoon is where they originate. If they begin in the Atlantic Ocean, they're called hurricanes, and it comes from the indigenous word for storm god, which was hurricane. West of the international date line, then these same hurricane-type events are called typhoons. It comes from the Chinese word taifeng, or typhoon, meaning big wind. Indian Ocean and the Bay of Bengal, they're just called cyclones.
Like giant engines that use warm, moist air as fuel, tropical storms can form any time of year, where the water is warm enough to feed the developing cyclones. Every year, lists of names for tropical storms are created for each geographic region. The names are assigned in alphabetical order as they're detected. South of Grand Bahama Island on New Providence Island,
Crazy, crazy, crazy.
Chela and her brother Alejandro run a refuge for homeless and abandoned dogs.
I came to the Bahamas because I met somebody, and I thought it was gonna be my dream, my fairy tale, but there were dogs everywhere. I was on the street taking care of the dogs, at the clinic, picking up dogs. After 10 years, I was given a choice, the dogs or the marriage. And the dogs needed me. I don't think the dogs were gonna find another me. That's what I thought, so I gave up on my marriage and my life.
As Tropical Storm Dorian heads towards the Caribbean, Chela and Alejandro keep busy with the dogs like nothing's happening.
It was in the news as a tropical storm, which we deal with it constantly, so there was nothing to worry about it.
But as Dorian bears down on the Caribbean, states of emergency are implemented, and Dorian makes landfall on the U.S. Virgin Islands as a Category 1 hurricane.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen, all for free. No subscription required. Download Veely now.
There are 5 categories of hurricanes. Category 1 has sustained winds of 119 kilometers per hour or more.
Miraculously, Dorian passes through much of the Caribbean with relatively little damage. As Dorian sweeps north towards the Bahamas, it's upgraded to a Category 2 hurricane. Along the coast of Grand Bahama, Stefan begins securing his newly built home as his wife heads inland to stay with family.
Everybody in Grand Bahama, around my neighborhood, trying to get plywood, trying to board up their house, trying to get supplies, trying to make their house secure.
As the hurricane approaches, Deshawn messages Jensen, asking him to fuel up their jet skis.
After the storm, getting fuel is very difficult, so I wanted them to be just full of fuel. Usually we'd go out and ride and assess damage by sea after the storm.
After filling them, I jokingly post on social media stating, if anyone needs rescues, we're here to help. We didn't expect to use our jet skis during the hurricane. That was the last thing that was on my mind.
Little do they know, things are about to change. Monitoring the threat, an NOAA flight heads directly above the growing hurricane and deploys a dropsonde.
Inside, they have sensors for measuring temperature, pressure, humidity, wind direction, and speed. It's like doing a CAT scan of a hurricane. They are extremely valuable in understanding the anatomy of these tropical storms.
Residents of the Bahamas receive shocking news. Dorian has grown to a Category 5 hurricane.
5 is lumping all of the ones that would be winds in excess of 250 kilometers per hour. This is what we call catastrophic. It's really a life changer. A brick home can be flattened. Entire trees would just be picked up and carried like sticks and just tossed like javelins. The damage is, it looks like a war zone.
Warnings are issued to take immediate cover. The police state that if the warnings are not heeded, the end could be fatal. On New Providence, Chela is running an errand when she hears the news.
I went to the vet and they were securing the clinic, and I thought it was gonna be just a tropical storm. I said, no, it's a hurricane Category 5. So I came to the refuge. I told my brother, collect all of the hurricane shutters. We are in trouble because we haven't done anything.
Dozens of makeshift shelters house the rescue's 80 dogs. There's no way they'll withstand a Category 5 storm. Chela knows they need to act fast.
There was no way that I was gonna leave the dogs outside. We dismantled the dog houses, the canopies, the tents, and we moved the dogs inside.
There's no time to waste. If the storm is anything like the Labor Day hurricane, things could go from bad to worse quickly.
In 1935, there was an infamous hurricane called the Labor Day hurricane. This was not just a 5. This was like a super 5 at 298 kilometers per hour. And it was the strongest wind from a landfalling hurricane in history that had ever been known. It totally obliterated small towns in that area, took out trains, took out railway lines. I think it killed about 423 people.
The storm destroyed almost everything along a 65-kilometer strip of the Florida Keys. Those who live on the small islands of the Bahamas can only hope that Dorian won't hit full force. With 80 rescue dogs already in the house, the thought of homeless dogs out on the streets in a Category 5 hurricane is more than Chela can bear. She heads out to find more strays in need of help.
We knew that something bad was coming our way, and I tried to rush and grab as many dogs as I could.
Chela rescues 17 more dogs, but the storm becomes too intense. With 97 dogs inside the house, 79 in her master bedroom alone, Chela finally closes the door.
The wind already was just going crazy, and by the time I had everybody in the house, we just closed ourselves in.
Chela begins to document the ordeal over social media.
Everyone here gets along and welcome their newcomers with tail wags, because they know that they are their brothers and sisters in suffering on the streets. Each of my babies deserve to have loving homes, so please, I am begging to rescues to help them. My heart is breaking that I left so many on the streets. Because I have no more room to bring them.
Chela has some time to post pictures before she loses power.
We lost the electricity around 4 o'clock. The internet, cable, phone line, everything was gone.
Dorian is about to hit the Bahamas full force, and Chela and Alejandro have lost all connection with the outside world.
We can all drown. Anything can happen during a hurricane.
During the night, Hurricane Dorian hits the Bahamas full force. After staying behind to secure his family's home, Stefan wakes up with a shock.
I was sleeping at the time when the hurricane was here. Me and my dog, Coco, that's who wake me up. Because her bed started floating on the floor, and she started barking to alarm me. So when I get out of the bed and I put my foot on the floor, it felt water about that high. I said, oh man, it's down here already. So I got up. When I got up and I opened up my room door, the water was so high, and when I opened the door, it pushed me back.
Stefan and Coco are trapped. There's nowhere to go.
It's often the storm surge, which is the killer aspect of a hurricane. You can survive the winds and the heavy rains, but boy, that wall of water that comes across the beach, comes right inland for several kilometers, can be really very destructive. You take a cubic meter of water, it weighs about 1,000 kilograms. That can pound and demolish structures. It's these timbers, it's 2x4s, it's glass and doors that get rushed into this water. Lower levels of strong, sturdy buildings are destroyed. It's really a force, a huge force of nature that can kill people.
On New Providence, Chela and her brother Alejandro struggle through the night.
79 dogs were in my bedroom alone. They could have killed each other if they wanted to, but it's like they understood that we were in distress, and I was in distress because of the situation. Everybody behaved.
But the safety of the dogs isn't the only thing they have to worry about.
I always worry about if we have a high tide and we can all drown. Anything can happen during a hurricane.
North, on Grand Bahama, Stefan searches for a place to escape his flooding home. There's only one place to go.
And I walk in the house, coming into the side here, and waste water, going to get the ladder, carry it to the manhole so I could go up. Because my ceiling high, you know. So I had to use a ladder to get up in the manhole. And I carry my dog up there with me.
Stefan and Coco are stranded in the attic of his bungalow. To make matters worse, his cell phone has fallen into the water. He's completely cut off from the outside world.
And no one could reach me, couldn't talk to me no more. That was why people thought I was, dead or gone,
It's a terrifying night for Stefan, and he isn't the only one in desperate need of help. The east end of Freeport, Grand Bahama, is nearly completely submerged. As residents struggle to find higher ground, Deshaun learns that friends are trapped in their attic.
I told him, like, hey, my jet ski's full of gas. I'm going to try to come and get you guys.
Deshaun rallies together volunteers from his neighborhood. They drive as far as they can before the water stops them.
This is the ocean. A good 200 feet further than when we came earlier.
They unload their jet skis and take to the flooded streets.
It was insanely dangerous, wildly scary. The wind was blowing profusely at this point. The rain pretty much felt like small rocks just pounding at you. Pretty much most of the city was underwater. Most of the roads that you would take, you had to redirect around.
As Deshaun battles to find a route to reach his friends on Grand Bahama, the worst of the storm miraculously passes New Providence.
For the grace of God, we were spared. Some poles on the ground, some flooding, no major catastrophes like other hurricanes.
For Chela, all of their efforts through the night have been worth it.
My love for dogs started since I was a child. They don't want nothing in return. As long as you treat them good, it's mind-blowing. These animals, they are so loving.
While Chela and the dogs are out of the woods, Deshaun and the volunteers are battling unrelenting hurricane conditions on Grand Bahama. He manages to get his friend's family to safety, but the ordeal reveals the desperate situation for many.
I found some young guys outside pleading for help for some people. There was a lady and her daughter just on the top of her car, just sitting out in the middle of the storm. And nearby, there was one woman that had a newborn baby in a styrofoam cooler. When I found her, the baby was staying afloat in this because the water levels, they were in the house. The house water was about 5-6 feet, and a pregnant lady in one house. And so after I saw this, I told one of my guys that went with me to do the rescues, let's clear the neighborhood.
As word spreads of their rescue efforts, more volunteers join in. But no one is aware that Stefan and Coco are still trapped in their attic.
No food, no water, can't sleep because I have to wash the water. I have to stay up, like, doing this. I couldn't lay down flat, so I had to stay like a pose, like a Coco was right there, trembling and wondering what happening to her. Why she up here? She trembling, and I just hug her and put her next to me. Man. Bring back memories, man. Bring back memories. Yep, I hold her. She was my comfort. I'm not gonna lie. She was. And her dog, we had her when she was a little baby. I love her.
Trapped in the attic with Coco, Stefan has no idea what's happened with his other dog, Brewster, who was outside when the storm hit. And things are about to get worse.
Never in a million years could I prepare for what Dorian had brought to the island.
Around the world, the total impact of hurricanes like Dorian are hitting in unexpected ways. But on the island of Grand Bahama, as water levels continue to rise, a nightmare scenario unfolds. Late on September 1st, Dorian stalls just north of Grand Bahama.
Typically, hurricanes move at a speed of maybe 8 to 12 kilometers per hour. Now, what happened, though, was very unfortunate because it slowed right down.
Like a cork floating along a river, hurricanes are pushed along by ocean winds. If the winds slow down, the hurricane can stall. In the case of Dorian, it slowed to just 1 kilometer an hour.
You could walk faster than this hurricane moved. It spun around hour after hour and just obliterated the island's
Dorian stalls for 40 hours, lashing the islands of Grand Bahama and nearby Great Abaco with rain, waves, and winds as high as 295 kilometers an hour. Deshawn, Jensen, and a team of 40 jet skiers and boaters battle the storm in search of survivors.
At this point, we would have had, I think, anywhere from 200 to 300 just random people calling our phones and sending us messages requesting people to be rescued.
Jensen is shocked by what he sees.
One of the rescues I remember was rescuing an infant from out of ceiling. I was able to, punch the ceiling open at a certain angle where I was able to get the baby out.
There were some people that were in life and death situations, and so that's what kind of kept us going. Just knowing that we were in a position to help.
Still trapped in his attic, with no food or water, exhausted and hungry, Stefan struggles to remain hopeful.
Through all the hurricane, I didn't sleep. I just stayed up for 3 days, didn't eat, just praying and sobbing, all night, Thank God. But I pray, Lord, that, this is the way I'm supposed to die, This is the way I'm coming to die, not like this,
As Stefan's hopes for rescue shrink, Dorian finally begins to move north. And Deshawn returns home to assess the damage.
When I came home, I was just in awe, just like very saddened because, I wasn't sure where to go to next.
Deshawn knows how lucky he and his loved ones are.
A lot of the people that I know, or all of them survived. Jensen had somebody that was very close to him that actually reached out for help.
She was stuck in a roof and she could actually see the water rising. So we actually tried to go down, but under weather conditions, the winds were extremely dangerous. At this point, she told me she was still stuck in the roof and she was desperately needed help.
Despite their best efforts, they're unable to reach her. Days later, Jensen receives devastating news.
Some other rescue team found her body in some nearby bushes.
Despite this heartbreaking loss, Jensen tries to focus on the positive and the lives they were able to save.
We rescued about over 150 persons during this time.
It's a very good feeling, very good feeling knowing that you got people out of harm's way and knowing that you survived yourself.
The morning after the storm, Chella makes an exciting discovery.
After we clean up the debris at the refuge, I went to a coffee shop looking for internet because I needed to know what was happening. I needed for my family to know that we were okay.
The owner lets her in on some incredible news. The storm has created a remarkable opportunity for Chella's dog rescue.
He said, Chella is crazy. Check the fundraiser, check the pages. Your pictures went viral. It's everywhere, everybody is sharing it. I never, in a million years, I thought that those pictures were gonna be a sensation. It was insane.
Donations for the refuge pour in. People around the world work to help rehome the dogs.
Everybody all of a sudden knew of my dogs. I was able to send 79 dogs in 2 days to rehome. And pretty much everybody by now has been adopted. That was the good news about the hurricane. It took a major devastation for my dogs to find a window of opportunity to leave the Bahamas. It completes me knowing that I started something and I finished it till the end. And the end was when they found the happiness that they deserved.
As the waters in his home begin to recede, Stefan and Coco are finally able to climb down from the attic. He discovers that Dorian has completely destroyed his new home.
The wall went when I came down. It's this big, open, bright light. I said, wow. Then when I look around, I see my neighbors, them, and other places, them, their wall down too.
Stefan knows he's lucky to be alive.
Coco did save my life because she was there with me, and I was holding her, and I was crying too, you know? As soon as the water came down, my wife came over here on the family to check up on me, you know. My sisters, my family, all of them came over, you know, checking up on me. Friends, close friends, you know, came over. Man, a lot of hugs. Oh, man, a lot of hugs. A lot of hugs. I needed that, you know, because they was worrying too. But they was worrying.
Hurricane Dorian leaves the islands of Grand Bahama and Great Abaco devastated. If the categories of storms were extended at 295 kilometers an hour, Dorian would be classified as a Category 6 hurricane. When storms are particularly deadly or costly, their names can be retired, never to be used again. In a strange twist, in 2020, the committee that makes these choices is unable to meet due to the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic. Because names are only recycled every 6 years, the committee has until 2025 to retire the name. But Dorian will likely be retired. In the wake of Dorian, there is strength and renewal.
You know, Grand Bahamians are resilient. I tell people we are hurricane experts, if there is such a thing.
I took a greater appreciation on life and lived life for the moment.
3 days after Stefan and Coco climbed down from the attic,
KK, you didn't hear me call his name? We started wagging tail, he started coming close.
a miracle. Brewster has found his way home.
Beaming people, we warriors, man. We go for it. Yeah, Brewster. New beginning now. Coming big and stronger. That's all. He's so happy. You know, you want. Let me go, boy.
While the power of a hurricane can be devastating, the total impact can also have astonishing outcomes. As a hurricane ends a drought.
It's a little part of the accounting. It's on the other side of the ledger.
I sometimes think tropical storms and hurricanes are given a bum rap. You know, believe it or not, there's some good that can come from these monster storms. Take cities along the eastern seaboard of the United States. What would they do for rainfall if they didn't have hurricanes? You'd have a lot of reservoirs that would go dry. You'd have terrible drought periods. You'd have not water for irrigation. Wells would go dry. And so we actually depend sometimes on the rainwaters.
7 years before Hurricane Dorian, and over 700 kilometers northwest of the Bahamas, the southeastern U.S. is a tinderbox.
The interior southeastern United States, Georgia, South Carolina, western North Carolina, Florida, those areas were in severe drought.
Northern Florida is hard hit, with 18 wildfires raging. One scorches more than 45 square kilometers of national forest. As the region is grappling with drought, Tropical Storm Debbie is headed for New Orleans when something unanticipated happens.
Surprising twist to Debbie was all of the forecast models projected it to travel west towards Louisiana and Texas. And it did briefly, and then turned almost 180 degrees and headed nearly due east towards the sort of eastern panhandle of Florida.
The storm makes landfall and spawns 13 tornadoes. The deluge of water undercuts the ground and 52 sinkholes appear in just one county. Hundreds of homes are damaged. When it's passed, it's caused $250 million in damage and taken 10 lives. Tropical storms and hurricanes can often deal a devastating blow. Yet in some cases, they also have a complex relationship with drought. And, as in the case of Tropical Storm Debbie, can cause a stunning reversal to extreme droughts.
Tropical Storm Debbie, its landfall was kind of right around the elbow of Florida and moved right into an area that had been riddled with wildfires for weeks. It had been in severe drought for a period of months before that. Debbie moved pretty slowly, produced a lot of rain all across the whole peninsula there, Florida, and in the course of 2 days ended those severe drought conditions and really quelled the wildfire situation at the same time.
Jason's research has shown that this type of turnaround in drought conditions isn't rare.
In parts of the Southeast, almost half of the droughts of the last century ended because of landfalling tropical systems.
The researchers coined the term drought busters.
What my research focuses on is tropical cyclone drought busters, when the rainfall from a single landfalling tropical cyclone single-handedly is enough to end existing drought conditions in the area affected by its rainfall.
Similar drought-busting systems can be seen in different places around the world.
As far as the rapid transition from dry to rather wet conditions that's associated with drought busting, we do see that in certain circumstances around the world. The South Asian monsoon is an example where the summer season tends to be in a lot of locations in South Asia rather wet with the rainfall that we characteristically think of with the monsoon. The hurricane is a double-edged sword. They're very important components of the rainfall climatology. While this wouldn't be expected to offset the negative aspects, the costs and damages associated with landfall and tropical systems, it's a little part of the accounting. It's on the other side of the ledger.
But where does it lie on the balance sheet when a 350-ton ship is dragged across the ocean floor?
There's no way that a ship can literally just disappear, but it really had.
Florida often bears the brunt of hurricane season, but unlike Tropical Storm Debbie, in 2017, Hurricane Irma delivered a different kind of surprise outcome. This one at the bottom of the ocean. Hurricane Irma tears through the leeward islands of southern Florida. The storm leaves 12 million people without power. 90% of buildings are damaged. 60% of the population homeless. 129 lives are lost.
Hurricane Irma passed through Florida, but very soon after there was a second hurricane. Hurricane Maria was literally 2 weeks later that came up the east coast of Florida. Now it was two hurricanes back to back.
Before the dual hurricanes hit, Ian and the ReefSmart team were working in Florida.
ReefSmart creates three-dimensional maps of the aquatic ecosystem to help divers and snorkelers explore that environment in a safe, sustainable way. If you want to know what's going on underneath the water, then you would reach for a ReefSmart guide. In August, we were finishing up mapping work in Broward County, the Fort Lauderdale area. We were mapping about 35 wrecks and reefs. There was one more wreck that was due to be sunk, which was the Okinawa.
A 33-meter-long, 350-ton military tug, the Okinawa, was being dropped as an artificial reef.
The idea of artificial reefs is that you place a structure on the seabed and automatically fish are attracted to that. And it builds up an ecosystem around that shipwreck. So we visited the Okinawa about a week to 10 days later. It was sitting perfectly on the bottom, upright at about 70 feet in a north-south orientation. The fact that it was sitting upright was perfect. And if a wreck is slightly tilted, it makes you a little bit disoriented when you get into the wreck. So this wreck had been dropped perfectly on the seabed.
The ReefSmart team is finishing their Florida work when they hear about the impending hurricanes.
Our first response when we saw the hurricane heading for Florida was all the people that we had met in Florida and we'd worked with, we were worried for them and about, are they able to get to safety?
Soon after Ian and the team arrive home in Montreal and the hurricanes have passed through Florida, they receive some unbelievable news.
We started getting the calls pretty soon after we arrived in Montreal. The phone started pinging. It was some of the dive centers that we had worked with in Florida had gone down and literally dropped off the boat at the GPS coordinates of the Okinawa and said, it's just not there. We're just saying, check the GPS coordinates. There's no way that a ship can literally just disappear, but it really had. I think it took a second dive center to go there and confirm, like, yes, it is actually gone.
But where could a 350-ton ghost ship have just disappeared to? Aren't waters supposed to be calm under the surface?
We weren't sure at that point whether it had literally been blown to pieces or whether it had just been moved. The thing is that the wreck was very new and structurally sound, so it was unlikely that it could just be broken up that quickly. So the dive centers started doing a search pattern around those GPS coordinates, just increasingly getting larger circles around that point, trying to find where the structure is using the depth sounder, until all of a sudden they ping something that's not flat seabed at 70 feet. They found the structure about 200 feet away. It was clear also that the structure had changed itself, not just the location, but it was now rolling onto its side. It had been shifted around about 100 degrees, so it was facing in a different direction. So this shows where the wreck used to be, lying in a north-south orientation. And this is how it was moved 200 feet and swung around, facing the other direction, and with the mast bent over to one side and the whole ship rotated. The mermaid statue was holding a reflecting ball, but she sits in this bar area where it was decorated with, you see these small starfish and other creatures. The hurricane just tore all of those kind of structures off.
The Okinawa wasn't the only dive site that had been affected by the hurricanes.
For dive centers or individuals that had gone out to dive different wrecks, each one of them had come back and said that their structures had changed. The Ancient Mariner, the whole upper deck had been torn off that shipwreck and was now lying on the side of the shipwreck. Rodeo 25, the superstructure of that wreck had collapsed further, and Captain Dan, the smokestack had been removed.
The 3D mapping work done by ReefSmart before the hurricane gave an opportunity to learn how and why the wrecks had been affected in such different ways.
We started to try and figure out why some shipwrecks changed in the way that they did. And this is the scientists and as big as the team at ReefSmart are all marine biologists, so we were fascinated that we had this sort of strange experiment that we hadn't planned to capture but had. So we'd almost created a unique natural experiment where we had mapped a bunch of these wrecks and reefs before a hurricane, and then I had the opportunity to map them again immediately after so we could take a look at what had changed. We started asking ourselves some questions about why the Okinawa moved in the way that it did. It was obviously a new wreck, so it had really just was resting on the seabed rather than sort of slightly buried into the seabed, but it was also positioned parallel to the oncoming waves. So as the waves hit, the ship was basically broadside to those waves, which would have offered it the largest surface area, which may have been something to do with the fact that it was moved physically as much as it was. Some of the other wrecks that had been down longer had not been physically moved, because my suspicion is that they had nestled down into the sediment a little bit more. They'd been there, sometimes more than a decade, so they'd almost become part of the seabed. The hurricanes obviously create a lot of wind, and that wind creates waves, and there's also currents that can move the seawater around as well. So I think it's a combination of the currents and the waves that are causing the structures on the bottom to move. It says something about the power of these storms, that they can just literally pick up a ship of that size and move it physically across the seabed. These were storms that weren't even direct hits. Neither of them had passed directly over the wreck. They had just moved the water enough to be able to pick up the ship. You kind of think sometimes that once you're down underneath the water, you're in this calm and peaceful environment, and anything that happens on the surface, you're oblivious to almost. You're in your own little world, but the power of these hurricanes means that the waves and the currents are literally moving things around down there like chess pieces. It's pretty powerful stuff.
With the ferocious power of hurricanes undeniable, one scientist tries to harness the amazing energy of a cyclone.
An average hurricane would be the same power or force as setting off 10,000 nuclear bombs.
Hurricanes, cyclones, typhoons. These deadly whirlwinds can be devastating. But could they also be a solution to the death and destruction from nuclear meltdowns and other energy disasters? A 9.0 magnitude earthquake strikes off the coast of Japan, inducing a 15-meter tsunami. The Fukushima nuclear plant is struck with devastating results. More than 18,000 people are killed, and 160,000 forced from their homes. The disaster struck home for engineer Atsushi, and in 2013, he started green tech firm Shell Energy to tackle the problem.
Our life work to achieve all renewable energy society. Our generation have to change for our children, our future.
He wanted to find a way to lower the death print. The death print is the number of people killed per kilowatt hour of energy produced. The pursuit of energy takes hundreds of thousands of lives every year. Atsushi was determined to find a safe, renewable form of energy. But where? His thoughts went to a common weather event in Japan, the typhoon.
In Japan, so many typhoons every year.
These destructive tropical cyclones can pack a hefty punch, with winds recorded at up to 345 kilometers an hour.
These are the most powerful storms on Earth. They are tremendous heat engines. An average hurricane would be the same power or force as setting off 10,000 nuclear bombs. The energy created by an average hurricane is about 600 terawatts of energy. If you took the world's current electrical generating capacity, it would be about 6 terawatts. So think about it. An average hurricane would have 100 times the electrical generating capacity of the world within itself.
But most of the energy from a hurricane exists in the form of water vapor that can't be captured.
Just 0.25% of the energy of a hurricane is the winds.
Yet that small percentage still equates to around 1.5 terawatts of energy, equivalent to over a quarter of the world's total electrical generating capacity. But is there a way to capture that energy? Could wind turbines be used?
I think conventional wind turbines, they are like dinosaur. Dinosaur. So they have a long history over the 100 years. They is getting larger, but primary design is not so changed.
As the wind industry has grown, their shortcomings have become clearer. Inefficient, short lifespans, large amounts of non-recyclable materials, and health issues are just some of the problems. It's estimated that more than 500,000 birds and bats are killed every year by industrial wind turbines in the US alone.
Often birds killed by the wind turbine. It's a very severe problem. So not good for environment.
But with catastrophic failures of conventional wind turbines occurring at even low wind speeds, trying to harness energy from even a Category 1 hurricane, with winds beginning at 119 kilometers an hour, isn't feasible. Atsushi took a new approach and created the world's first typhoon wind turbine. The egg beater-shaped turbine has no blades and is designed not only to withstand the destructive forces of a tropical cyclone, but also to harness it, while at the same time protecting wildlife. It works through something known as the Magnus effect.
So Magnus effect is known as the principle of the football. When we rotate the ball not go straight. It goes sideways.
On the side where the ball and wind travel in the same direction, there's less resistance. Where the ball and the wind travel in different directions, there's more resistance. This property pushes the ball in the direction of least resistance, the same way athletes use it to curve balls. Atsushi's bladeless turbine isn't just a theory. The first prototype was installed in Okinawa, Japan in 2016.
Our turbine is not noisy, and the birds can recognize turbine. This turbine can prevent the bird strike. Our turbine is not only the renewable energy, but very friendly to the environment.
As the world's population continues to grow, energy demands increase, and the pressures on wildlife and the environment build. One of the planet's most devastating natural disasters could end up offering a greener way to produce energy.
No wonder people are in awe of hurricanes. They just have so much energy. And it's to think that nature can produce all of that energy, I think is what's revealing.
Hurricanes, undeniably terrifying and destructive. They reveal their total power both above and below the ocean. Yet sometimes they can also quench a scorched earth, and they may offer opportunities for new sources of energy for a greener future. Earthquakes, terrifying.
It's like a nightmare.
Deadly.
If we had gone to bed 10 minutes later, I would be here as a widower.
And impossible to predict.
In a matter of seconds, everything can go away.
They can strike in the most unexpected places.
I always thought earthquakes were something that happens in California, not in Oklahoma.
But when disaster shakes the planet, the total impact can change engineering.
There are a lot of theories why those buildings perform well.
And even history. Hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes.
This was the deadliest tornado on record.
The impact can be devastating.
God completely wiped it off the map.
We step inside the disaster.
We were running for our lives.
It hits like a freight train.
And unravel the unexpected and sometimes jaw-dropping total impact.
Believe it or not, some good can come from these monster storms.
Earthquake sirens ring out across Mexico City. The alarms trigger mass evacuations. An 8.1 magnitude earthquake has struck, the largest in Mexico in 100 years. While the quake kills nearly 100 people in southern Mexico, it originates off the coast, 1,000 kilometers southeast of Mexico City, and the city is left relatively unscathed. For residents of Mexico, preparing for earthquakes is a normal part of life growing up. But they're unaware that a much more deadly earthquake is just around the corner.
From early on in school to your adult life, you're always doing drills for earthquakes. You're supposed to remain calm, listen to the leaders. Most people that live here are aware of the danger that an earthquake can bring. We all have that fear inside of us, but we also love our city.
Situated in the trans-Mexican volcanic belt, Mexico City was once the center of Aztec society. Today, Mexico City is a modern city, rich in history.
Mexico is awesome. It's great. I mean, we have a really cool weather. The people is awesome. I love Mexican food, Mexican music, Mexican culture.
Yet this thriving metropolis lies in one of the most seismically active regions in the world, along what's known as the Ring of Fire. Home to most of the world's volcanoes, this is where the Earth moves and roars to life.
The Ring of Fire, of course, people get very excited about this. It's basically just the Pacific Rim. The surface of the Earth is divided up into about 10 plates.
These tectonic plates are in constant motion. Where they meet, along the ring, about 90% of the world's earthquakes shake the planet.
As the oceanic plate dives down beneath the continents, this pressure is being built up by plate tectonics. It slips, and the energy then radiates out across the surface of the Earth. It's this sliding process as they move past one another that generates the earthquakes that we feel.
You know, Mexicans, especially if you come from Mexico City, are aware of the danger that an earthquake can bring. Like everyone, you grow up with the stories of the 1985 earthquake.
On the morning of September 19th, 1985, Mexico City started to shake.
I remember very clearly, it was a little bit before 7 o'clock in the morning. I went to the window and I could see the water of the pool just moving from one side to another, you know, like. And then I turned on the TV to see the news. There was no signal on the TV. I called my boss. I used to work at a TV station, and he said to me, you have to come to the studio. We have to start reporting.
A TV producer, Carlos headed into the city to cover the aftermath of the quake.
It was really devastating. It was really shocking. Everything collapsed. People bleeding, hurt. I mean, imagine a bomb just crashing into your city. It's like a nightmare.
The earthquake killed 10,000 and left 30,000 injured.
The 1985 event was a magnitude 8.0. To give a sense of the scale, it's about as much energy is released as the largest nuclear tests that there ever have been, and several thousand times larger than the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. The 1985 event was a real wake-up for Mexico City. There was a lot of damage, despite the fact that the earthquake was 300 kilometers away. So that was a real revelation. The fact that the earthquake was so far away from Mexico City really is what spurred the idea of developing an early warning system.
To implement the new early warning system, 12 seismic sensors were placed along the coast of Mexico. Today, there are more than 100 sensors. The sensors detect the initial P, or primary waves. These don't shake the ground and can't be felt except by the sensors, giving advance warning that the more damaging S, or shear waves, are soon to follow.
By putting seismic sensors close to the earthquake source at the coast and detecting the earthquake very rapidly, you could send a signal ahead of the seismic waves and provide up to about a minute's worth of warning before the city itself would shake. Mexico's warning system was the first early warning system publicly generating alerts back in 1991. And so there's no question, all of the warning systems around the world have kind of been following Mexico's lead.
32 years to the day after the catastrophic 1985 earthquake, sirens ring out across the city. It's the annual earthquake drill.
There's always like a standard procedure of where you should go immediately. There's like a protocol, you know? So we're definitely prepared.
That morning, Carlos visits his son on the set of a television show.
He introduced me to the director and some of the actors and gave me a tour around the hacienda, and then he asked me to stay. And I said, no, look, I have work to do. I'm going to go back home.
I was with the director and the DP. It was very hot. So we went inside the hacienda to the second floor, and we went outside to this terrace to get a little bit fresh before getting and shoot the scene.
Meanwhile, Andres is preparing to make a pitch for his bicycle business.
We are a startup, right? So we were actually sitting down and we were just about to start the pitch.
Suddenly, 2 hours after the annual siren testing, the sirens sound again.
It was definitely a huge surprise. And then the earthquake hit. and we started to freak out a bit. I went out on the street, and then I saw a lot of dust, and this woman crying that a building had collapsed, and I didn't really believe that until I saw the collapsed building, and then I heard that there was another collapsed building, and another one, and another one.
It's a big coincidence that there was the 85 earthquake, same day. I just stood there and I was like, it's gonna pass, right?
But the shaking does not stop.
It moved really, really, really strong. But my reaction was so shocked of seeing this corner of the building of the hacienda collapsing. Because we're talking about stone and rocks. The director was next to me, and he evacuated as soon as he felt the earthquake. But instead of evacuating, I just stood there.
Before he can react, things go from bad to worse.
I remember feeling this black shadow coming to me like boom, and just knocked me out. And I went to black.
32 years to the day of the country's worst natural disaster, Mexico City is hit by a 7.1 magnitude earthquake. As Carlos Jr. lies beneath a pile of rubble, his father is at home when the earthquake strikes.
I suddenly felt this strong movement, and then I realized it was an earthquake. So I went out and saw my neighbor's house collapse, and I was just waiting for the houses to collapse.
As the tremors subside, 3 states have suffered widespread destruction. Andres has managed to evacuate onto the streets with thousands of others.
You would see people with their head open. You heard about people being trapped in buildings, and you just feel kind of helpless.
Carlos has no idea yet what's happened to his son.
I received a call telling me that Carlos, my son, was trapped under the rubble of the hacienda they were shooting. And they told me that he was okay, that they managed to take him to a hospital. But I thought they told me he was okay because they didn't want to tell me that he died. So I started to drive. I was just focused on finding my son.
While Carlos races to his son, the people of Mexico City mobilize. First responders jump into action, along with thousands of everyday citizens. International disaster response teams begin flying in from around the world.
The time following the disaster is crucial, so that clock is ticking.
Gary is deployed from the U.S. with a team of 79. Along with their equipment, Gary brings his partner of 7 years, Tanker, one of 6 detection dogs on the team.
Tanker, he was easily the best dog that I've had, like an old pro. As soon as I put my equipment on, he knew it was time to go to work, and he was ready to go. When there's work to be done, rubble to be searched, the dogs are in that mode. Canines are able to detect people in an area much quicker than humans can. A dog could search in, say, 5-10 minutes, where it would take a human maybe up to an hour or longer. So that saves time, and by saving time, it could save lives.
As Gary, Tanker, and their team rush to Mexico City, hundreds of ordinary people race the clock to rescue those trapped in the rubble, forming human chains to remove debris. Andres also jumps into action.
The earthquake took away the roads, so cars weren't able to go pretty much anywhere. It was pretty obvious for us that we needed to help using our bikes.
Andres helps to organize a bike brigade, moving emergency supplies through the shaken city.
There were at least with us over 100 cyclists that were helping out, distributing the packages that contain mostly food, water, and supplies.
They deliver aid to some of the worst hit areas.
The ground had opened up and it had swallowed some of the houses.
The catastrophic effects of the earthquake are worse in some regions than others. But why?
One of the real challenges for Mexico City is that it sits in this old lake bed, so there's a lot of soft sediments. And so that means that as the energy comes up towards the city, it's actually amplified.
The shaking of the sandy substrate creates what's known as liquefaction. Like a bowl of jelly, water-saturated sediment loses its integrity and acts as a fluid.
This is what causes the large scale of destruction.
With collapsed and unstable buildings throughout the city, there's no time to spare.
You would see people just trying to help each other out, and it did awake something in the crew, in every one of us.
Sitting on top of a juncture of tectonic plates, Mexico's geology creates the perfect storm for seismic catastrophes. Like a slow-motion car crash, the Cocos Plate dives under Mexico at a rate of almost 8 meters every 100 years, about twice the rate of other plates. And as the Earth moves and adjusts to the sudden thrust of an earthquake, another danger looms: aftershocks.
So when you have one earthquake, then just that energy traveling through the Earth's surface, it can trigger other earthquakes. The most aftershocks are smaller than the main shock by definition. However, it's also possible it actually triggers a larger event.
After the initial shockwave, Mexico experiences over 40 aftershocks.
We've been through some very substantial aftershocks, and all of a sudden things change.
At the hacienda, Carlos Jr. has no idea what's happened, till colleagues manage to pull him from under the rubble.
The next thing I remember is waking up in the grass and looking up and looking at my photographer. I was very dizzy and confused and scared.
As Carlos Jr. falls in and out of consciousness, his colleagues desperately try to get him to a hospital.
But it was chaos everywhere. We got into this hospital which collapsed, but they were attending people outside on the parking lot. I got stitches. They didn't want me to go to sleep because they knew I got hit in my head.
Hospitals are inundated with patients as victims of the earthquake are brought in from around the city. 40 buildings have collapsed, and specialized equipment and search dogs are brought in to look for signs of life amongst the rubble.
When we use things like our listening devices that can pick up somebody that's buried under a couple floors, we need complete silence.
Amidst the crowds, jackhammers, and generators, rescue workers raise their hand, the universal symbol for silence.
It's amazing how quickly everybody will quiet down, cars will be turned off. We can get complete silence in just a matter of seconds, and that's vital for what we do.
If a dog detects the scent of a live person, it alerts the team.
Once he finds a scent, he'll kind of come at it from different ways to find where the strongest scent is, and then he'll just keep barking there. If we've located a live person in it, then we'll stay there continuously 24 or 36 hours until that person's rescued. We have the equipment and the personnel to be able to dig through rubble. We have jackhammers. We can go through several floors of collapsed structure to get to somebody that's underneath. The feeling that I have when we pull somebody alive that's been buried under rubble is, it's hard to explain. Overjoyed, I can just still see the face of the last victim that we pulled out. It's an unbelievable feeling. I couldn't really describe it in words.
Yet amongst the twisted labyrinth of metal, concrete, and glass, there are places even the dogs can't reach. But there is one renowned group that dares go where most no one else would ever tread. The moles. South of Mexico City, the total impact of an earth-shattering earthquake is yet to be discovered. But as the city rushes to find survivors, Carlos has managed to make his way through the chaos to his son.
So when my dad arrived, he took me to another clinic. Everybody was surprised that I didn't break any bones. Everything is going through my mind. The accident, actually what happened. I mean, was it real? It was a really big earthquake, like a movie. CGI, explosions everywhere. The buildings collapsing. In a matter of seconds, everything can go away.
Since he was born, we've been so close. We're like soulmates. He's my best friend. I'm glad he's alive. That's all I can say.
Two days after the earthquake, 249 people are confirmed dead. There could still be survivors, but there are places too dangerous for anyone to enter. Too small, too unstable, spaces that could collapse in an instant. Yet there is one legendary rescue force that dares to go where no one else can. Los Topos, the moles.
Los Topos nacieron a raíz del sismo de 1985 por la idea de formar un grupo especializado que pudiera ayudar en temblores. Principalmente hoy nos dedicamos casi a cualquier tipo de agente perturbador. Somos un grupo especializado en búsqueda y rescate en estructuras colapsadas. El trabajo es sacar a una persona, recuperar un cuerpo o hacer un túnel tal vez para ver si hay alguien más o que pueda entrar una unidad canina, un K9 y verificar si hay vida.
Internationally renowned, they seem to have no fear, crawling into the most inaccessible, dangerous places on Earth after disasters strike. Like Gary and the Canine Squad, it takes a special breed to become a mole.
Somos pocos en realidad, pero es que el trabajo es arduo. Tienes que tener, como dicen, la mente fría, dirigido a lo que vas y sí, lo que te encuentras, sí te deja una huella.
Like many aid groups, the moles are volunteers.
La satisfacción de haber ayudado. Pago no hay, todos somos voluntarios en la brigada. Nos ayudan con donativos, las personas, es nuestro tiempo, es lo que nosotros aportamos a la sociedad.
Teams from around the world arrive to help. 501 rescue workers, 32 search dogs, 440 tons of aid from over 27 countries. Then, on September 24th, aftershocks force rescuers to stop working. But just hours later, they're back at it, refusing to give up. But by then, the death toll has reached 370, and rescue turns to recovery.
And that's always hard to accept. We don't ever, turn that portion off of looking for the live victims. But we just know that the chances are decreasing as time goes on.
As the death toll mounts, the question arises. With Mexico's advanced warning in place, with over 100 seismic sensors, why was there so little time between when the alarms rang out and the earthquake hit?
So Mexico's warning system is very focused on a few seismic sensors along the coast, providing a warning to Mexico City and now to some other cities as well.
But instead of originating along the coast, the earthquake originated inland, closer to Mexico City.
The epicenter was 50 kilometers from the city. Because the earthquake was so close, the P wave had actually arrived in the city by the time the sirens went off. So you have this much closer, smaller, but much stronger shaking because it's much closer to the city. So the system did work, but it didn't go off until after the first seismic waves had arrived.
The disaster takes its emotional toll.
You know, you're making plans for future, you're going through your daily life, and then somebody's trying to take away your city, right? Nothing else like really makes sense. Someday this could strike again, but you just can't leave the city. It's a great city.
The Mexico City anniversary earthquake highlights the need for improved detection.
The whole system has to be much faster because the system has to provide warnings for earthquakes that are right beneath our feet. So we have to absolutely minimize the time it takes to process the data, understand the earthquake, and push the warning out to people. We cannot predict earthquakes today, for sure, and most seismologists don't think we'll be able to do it in the foreseeable future. And the reason is that on any given fault plane, there are hundreds of earthquakes, very, very small earthquakes every single day. And then on a particular day, at a particular time, one of these small earthquakes grows to become a big earthquake. So to predict the big earthquakes, you need to predict all of these tiny earthquakes and which one of them will become large. Plate tectonics tells us that we continue to get these recurring earthquakes in the same locations, similar kinds of magnitudes.
But what's happening when thousands of kilometers away, earthquakes rock unsuspecting communities far from any fault lines?
All of a sudden, boom. Just like a huge airplane had crashed in the yard.
It's the middle of the night when the Earth moves. 6 years before the Mexico City earthquake, and 2,000 kilometers north, a sudden shaking wakes up residents of the small town of Prague, Oklahoma.
I was in bed when it woke me up. We didn't know what that was. Earthquakes really were something that happens in California, not in Oklahoma.
There's a tremendous shaking and vibration, and we knew exactly when it occurred because it stopped our grandfather's clock in the parlor at 2:15 a.m. on the money.
A 4.7 magnitude earthquake had just struck.
We hadn't had any earthquakes really around here, so we didn't know what that was. Tornadoes, floods, hailstorms. Those are the disasters that you really thought about, for this area.
At 10:53 p.m. that night, they're struck again. It's unmistakable, a 5.7 magnitude earthquake. It's felt as far away as Wisconsin, almost 1,300 kilometers away.
All of a sudden, boom. Just like a huge airplane had crashed in the yard, the house started shaking, the walls began cracking, there's dust flying. My wife was screaming, crying. I was spread eagle legs apart just to keep standing up. And I just knew in my own mind that upstairs was going to come crashing down into the first floor. It was very terrifying.
We received a lot of calls. People thought there was an explosion because it was so loud and shook everything in town. A lot of people thought maybe something ran into their house. So the police department, they were inundated with calls. And then we got the teams out looking around for damage.
Joe and his wife had just gone to bed before the big quake hit.
We both felt very grateful to have left the room at 10:30 because our big chimney came through the roof and landed where she had been sitting about 10 minutes before. If we had gone to bed 10 minutes later, I would be here as a widower.
By the morning, nearly 30 aftershocks have rippled through the ground. 10 of them above a 3.0 magnitude. Houses look like they've been ransacked. 14 homes and a university building have sustained damage.
Every corner, there was large cracks. Over every door, every window, there were cracks.
Between Prague and Meeker, the highway actually buckled in places. There were a couple of injuries from the earthquake. There was a woman that was hit by debris that fell through the roof of her house. There was quite a lot of distress within the community, kind of like waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know, when's the next one going to happen? And how big is it going to be? Is it going to be worse than the one before?
As a town and a state sit on edge, researchers investigate what was happening.
So starting in around 2009, Oklahoma went from a background of about 2 to 3 magnitude 3.0 earthquakes per year to a peak of around 900 magnitude 3.0 earthquakes in 2015 and 2016.
It was clear the region was being hit by earthquakes, but why? Prague sits nowhere near the edge of a tectonic plate, where most seismic activity occurs. And while Prague sits on a splay of the Wilzetta fault system, it was generally inactive. Why had it suddenly sprung to life?
We found out the earthquakes were caused by fracking and wastewater disposal. There was a disposal well located along the fault line just northwest of Prague.
Also known as hydraulic fracturing. Fracking is when a mixture of water, sand, and chemicals is injected at high pressure deep into the earth through drill sites. This creates cracks in the rock so natural gas and oil can flow more freely for extraction. When the process is complete, the contaminated wastewater is disposed of by injecting it back into the earth. In Oklahoma, the injections were stressing the previously inactive fault line, causing it to shift and creating a 4,000% increase in earthquakes.
They probably reached some sort of critical pressure, some critical threshold by which it started to create these earthquakes.
I did not know that earthquakes could be created. I always thought earthquakes was just the shifting of the earth, a natural phenomenon. I mean, it is a physical process. When you're pulling stuff out of the ground, you're creating a cavity. When you're pumping it back in at a high rate of speed, you're pushing things around. So, I mean, it makes sense that you can cause the ground to shift if you're doing those things.
I think we've come to the point where there's common acceptance that there is a connection between fracking and earthquakes.
Following the advice of researchers, the government began implementing stricter rules for fracking, and in 2016, mandated a 40% reduction in fluid injections.
So anytime a large earthquake would occur, they would immediately ramp down disposal in a certain area near those larger earthquakes.
You know, we were glad when the earthquakes started tapering off and minimizing in the intensity. They've pretty much gone away in the Prague area, but they're still prevalent in other areas of the state.
We don't necessarily know what the future holds, but it might be several decades before we're back to sort of normal.
Well, earthquakes can be incredibly destructive. In one instance, the total impact uncovers a secret hidden for centuries.
Eso fue el descubrimiento de mi vida.
When the anniversary earthquake hit Mexico City on September 19, 2017, the 7.1 magnitude earthquake shook south-central Mexico to its core. Hundreds were killed. and thousands injured as buildings collapsed across 3 states. In Morelos State, just south of Mexico City, one of Mexico's most important archaeological sites, the Teopanzolco Temple, was also hit by violent shaking. While nothing can minimize the death and destruction of the earthquake, the total impact opened a door in history that might otherwise have stayed closed forever.
Yo estaba aquí en la oficina y de repente a la 1:15 que empieza a temblar, se sentía, se escuchaba como que un ruido de ruptura, de rodar piedras bajo la superficie. Fue terrible, terrible.
Living in an earthquake-prone area, the staff know it's vital to get out of the building.
Si se hubiera derrumbado techo, pues ni salimos. Entonces todos salimos afuera y ahí ya continuaba el sismo y estuvimos espantados. Bueno, ¿y ahora qué pasó?
After Barbara and her colleagues make it out of the office, they receive upsetting news from their colleagues at the temple site.
Avisaron que se cayó una parte de la pirámide. Yo no pude creer.
Teopanzolco is one of the only surviving examples of Aztec twin-stair pyramids.
Teopanzolco sí es muy importante, aunque chiquito, pero importante.
As they inspect the site, they find extensive damage.
La sacudida que hubo debido al temblor causó que todo se reacomodó al interior de la pirámide. Sí resultó cierto que todo un dado que es parte del norte de la estructura esa piramidal se desprendió el muro, se salió todo el relleno y pues las grietas por todos lados. La pirámide se sumió 40 centímetros, entonces toda la pirámide ahora está enchuecada.
While investigating the extent of the damage, they make a frightening discovery.
Los pisos de los templos pues se sumieron. Me asusté porque fue terrible y además pues estuvimos haciendo pruebas brincando sobre ese piso así y se sentía hueco, pues se sentía todo muy inseguro arriba.
The site is closed to tourists, and a team of archaeologists from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History are brought in. They use radar to scan the foundation and discover what looks like a hollow space under the temple.
De repente así parecía una esquina de algo a la profundidad de 1.5 metros. Se suponía está el núcleo sólido.
The crumbling walls are stabilized and they begin to dig. They uncover a secret room, 2 meters underneath the temple.
Pues fue una sorpresa muy grande, muy emocionante.
The 6 by 5 meter room has double facade walls made of well-cut elongated stones, stucco-covered pilaster, a bench, ceramics, and an incense burner. It's determined to be a temple to Tlaloc, understandably in the arid region, the god of rain.
Es un verdadero descubrimiento porque siempre se pensó que es esa construcción externa que corresponde a de 1450 de nuestra era y la construcción interna que era la superestructura que se pensaba era 1300, 1350 y ya.
Surprisingly, it's determined that the new inner temple was constructed up to 300 years earlier than the outer structure.
Se construyó en 1150, 1200 de nuestra era. Complicó un poco la cuestión histórica porque mucho tiempo se consideró que Teopanzolco fue construido como copia de lo que fue Templo Mayor, pero haciendo las investigaciones de temporalidad, pues nos dicen que Teopanzolco era mucho más temprano.
Out of the ruins and the tragedy of the earthquake, a piece of history is unearthed. And in the future, there may now be more to discover under the ancient temple site.
La arqueología abarca todo y sobre todo es una labor de detective de tratar de descifrar la historia a través de la cultura material. Pues yo creo que ese descubrimiento de ese templo fue descubrimiento de mi vida, pero pues fue muy trágico ese temblor.
Despite the damage to the temple, Teopanzolco has withstood the ravages of time in one of the most earthquake-prone regions of the world for at least 800 years. What is it that allows some structures to withstand the tremors of the earth while others crumble? Each earthquake gives an opportunity to understand their impact, and innovative engineering just might hold the answer to a safer future.
There are a lot of theories why those buildings perform well.
When earthquakes strike, their destructive impact on man-made structures can be deadly. But can old and new technology together save lives? Kit is an earthquake structural engineer and has spent more than 20 years working in earthquake-prone regions around the world.
The premise of the earthquake is so different from a hurricane or flood event. The reason is there is no warning. And there's aftershocks. And some of the cities get really damaged really bad, like on Haiti. Almost 200,000 buildings damaged or collapsed. They killed 300,000 people.
Kit understands that it's not typically earthquakes themselves that kill people, but their effects on man-made structures.
We have many, many older buildings, especially buildings built prior to 1970s. So basically what you see here is the second floor level, which collapsed into that. Many concrete structures, they're actually pretty dangerous buildings. Those things kill people.
When the ground moves underneath a building, it displaces the foundation and lower levels, sending shock waves through the structure. In tall buildings, this can create a terrifying sway. In many buildings, the structure is compromised and can collapse. Like the Aztecs' Teopanzolco temple in Mexico, though, not all structures collapse during an earthquake.
The Japanese pagodas, there are usually 5-level tower structures made of wood. And some were built over 400 years ago and withstood dozens of major earthquakes.
But how have structures hundreds of years old, built without modern building materials and techniques, managed to survive earthquakes while modern structures crumble?
There are a lot of theories why those buildings perform well. And one of the theory is the structure is made of the many flexible wood joints. And there's no nails or anything like that. So it's actually, structure itself is really flexible. And when it's moving around, the wood joints actually act as almost like what we call friction dampers. It's just sliding back and forth. That actually absorbs a lot of energy.
In the pagoda, the entire structure is also centered around a central pillar, the Shinbashira.
The whole buildings almost move like a snake. So that itself absorbs energy, very flexible structure. So that's one of the reasons why those buildings perform so well.
These ancient building techniques are similar to many of the techniques used to create earthquake resilience in buildings today.
But there are many different technologies out there to just make it better. Dampers are essentially kind of like a shock absorber in your car. Your car is a spring and a shock absorber. Just imagine if you take out the shock absorber, just only spring only, what kind of ride you're gonna get. What dampers do is reduce the movement. That makes a huge difference in performance.
A 6.8 magnitude earthquake strikes Taiwan. A construction crane on the 47th floor of a building collapses, killing 5 people. Miraculously, an inspection shows no structural damage to the building. But how? Built just 200 meters away from a major fault line, Taipei 101 was designed to withstand both typhoon winds and earthquakes.
How Taipei 101 works is they have what is called tuned mass damper. It's essentially really heavy ball suspended at the top level of this building. If the building moves this direction, this mass damper counterweights in a sense, so that absorbs the energy.
But not all construction requires such elaborate or expensive mitigation systems.
There's a myth out there saying seismic strengthening is too expensive. That's not true. Our study shows usually somewhere between 5% to 20% replacement, new construction, you can make the buildings good as brand new actually.
Adding the cost to new construction is even more cost effective.
Usually for dampers, adding maybe 0.5%, maybe maximum 2% to the construction cost, but that makes a huge difference in the performance. It's a really cost effective and a very important thing to do.
As a rescuer who puts his life on the line after earthquakes strike, Fernando sees the importance of improved construction.
Porque hay que salvar la mayor cantidad de vidas y no ir a rescatar. Yo creo que aquí lo que importante es la prevención.
Earthquakes, powerful and unstoppable. Science is revealing that humans can even create them. And while the total impact of earthquakes is still being discovered, secrets from the past are being unearthed. And new and ancient techniques are being brought together to help stop the deadly effects of these earth-shattering events.